In this video I will go through 10 reasons as for why the Middle East and its history are awesome in no particular order. Number 10. The Middle East is home to the earliest civilizations of mankind. You got ancient cities on the Anatolian Peninsula that date back to the Neolithic Stone Age. And you also have the great civilizations of Egypt and Sumer in Mesopotamia and various civilizations and cities in southern Arabia at the end of the Stone Age and early Bronze Age. These civilizations laid the foundation for civilization as we know it and were the earliest advanced civilizations in the history of mankind, only rivaled by the Indus civilization and the civilizations that were emerging in China. Number 9. You have the earliest examples of writing found in the Middle East. You have the hieroglyphs in Egypt with their pictorial depictions having meaning and being the stand-ins for various sounds. And you have Sumerian cuneiform with its writings and symbols representing syllable sounds. And these created the very earliest texts and inscriptions we know that mankind have produced and that we can interpret and understand. And also, later in Middle Eastern history, you also get a development of the modern alphabets through the Phoenicians that begin to develop a new writing system based upon consonants rather than based upon various syllables, as had been the case before with earlier writing systems. And these consonantal alphabets, or rather abjads, as they are called, were developed into the modern Hebrew writing system, eventually also into the Aramaic Syriac writing system and into the Arabic writing system, and was also transported west into Greece, where it would develop into the Greek alphabet that eventually also would transform into the Latin alphabet and the Cyrillic alphabet much later. So the origins of writing as we know it in the Western world are to be found in the Middle East. Number 8. Due to the existence of early writings, you actually have the world's longest history, spanning several civilizations through the entire area, following each other, only rivaled really by the continuity of civilization and history found in China. Sure, China instead of the Middle East could mostly be described as one civilization, but it's one civilization that has changed a lot and has not been static, just like the Middle East has been several civilizations, and also not static at all. But they still share the same point of the fact that you can go back thousands of years before Christ in history and still have history, as in written history in both cases. So the extremely long history is a point in the awesomeness of Middle Eastern history. Number 7. Middle Eastern history is extremely diverse. You have Bronze Age cultures such as the Sumerians and Akkadians in Iraq and also the early Babylonians. You have the Egyptians in Egypt. You have the Hittites on the Anatolian Peninsula, and you have the Sabaeans in Yemen. And for the Iron Age, you have the Assyrians, you have the famous Israelites as described in the Bible, and you have the earliest traces of Sabaean kingdom culture in Yemen, and you have the Persians dominating most of the Middle East, and you also have the Romans later. And when you go into the medieval period, it is not just Arabs there, as you have Kurds and Turks and Persians again, and a lot of minor peoples in the northern parts of the Middle East, like the Armenians, and also you have Berbers on the fringes of Egypt that actually did play some important roles during the Fatimid dynasty. And when speaking about the Middle East being very diverse, it goes into number 6. The Middle East is a region that connects continents. Asia, Africa and Europe are meeting in the Middle East. And thus, because of this very fact, it has been a center of cultural exchange and trade. The Silk Road has gone through the Middle East. The Ethiopic-Yemeni-Indian Triangle trade had its center in the southern parts of the Middle East, in southern Arabia particularly. And empires from all 3 continents have tried to dominate the region. You have Greeks and Romans with Alexander the Great and later the Roman Empire, and later colonial empires from Europe trying to take over the area. And from Asia you have Mongols and various Turkic invaders from the steppes of Asia. Even the Persian Iranic peoples of the Persian dynasties were originally from the Asian steppes. And from Africa you have Nubian kingdoms and groups that tried to invade Egypt, and later you had the Aksumite Empire from what is modern day Ethiopia trying to invade Southern Arabia in order to get control of this trade that I mentioned before. And you also have the reverse, with great empires from the Middle East expanding into Europe and Asia and Africa. Empires such as the Umayyad Caliphate and the Ottoman Empire expanded into Africa, Asia and Europe as well, so the opposite also happened. And talking about empires, this leads me to point number 5. The Middle East has been a land of large empires, dominated by large empires in fact. From the first empire recorded in human history, the empire of Sargon of Akkad, to the Assyrians, to the Achaemenid Persians, to Alexander the Great's Hellenic Persian Empire and its successor states. And then the Roman Empire, and the Eastern Roman Empire, and various later Persian dynasties, such as the Parthians and Sassanids. Then you have the Arabic invasions and conquests, with the various large caliphates, such as the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and the Fatimid caliphates. Then you have the Turkic Seljuk Empire, followed by the gunpowder empires such as the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Persian Empire, and many more in between, as the Middle East is the land of great empires and civilizations. Which leads me to point number 4. The Middle East has been the epicenter of great changes of civilizations and of the fall of great empires and the fall of civilizations. You have, for example, the Bronze Age collapse in the 12th century BC, where most of civilization in the Middle East completely collapsed and wanted to recover for hundreds of years, as the region was struck by disaster after disaster in a complex series of events which almost doomed civilization permanently, as it was the greatest civilizational collapse in human history. But you have also other less radical changes, but still very major changes in human history. You have, for example, Alexander the Great's conquest of Persia, creating an empire that would be remembered in history to our day. And you also have the Islamic conquest and the great religious change with the rise of Islam, creating the modern Middle East as we knew it in certain regards, at least religiously. The Middle East has been the center of great upheavals, where everything, or where almost everything, changes, and thus its history has been extremely important to study due to this very fact, as a center of great civilizational changes. And this leads me to point number 3. These great changes has had a great impact upon history due to the fact that the Middle East, for most of its history, has been more advanced than most of European, African and even Asian history. The richness through trade that has flowed through the Middle East, and the technology available to the Middle East through this trade and taking of the best things from the west, east, south and north, has created throughout history an area of immensely advanced cultures in comparison to other areas. And this goes far beyond even the Islamic Golden Age, when the Islamic world was at the center of science, knowledge and learning. Because the Middle East has almost always throughout history been more advanced. The Islamic Golden Age is just one example of this tendency of being the region that has been the most advanced in history. As I said before, the Middle East has been home to the first cities and civilizations. It has been home to the first examples of advanced irrigation, with the Hanging Gardens of Babylon being an example of immense engineering and irrigation. And you also have the first treatises on mathematics in Akkadian, and mathematics would be dominated by Middle Eastern scholars, arguably even during the time of the Greeks, as most Greeks that talked about mathematics took their ideas from the Middle East or even lived in the Middle East after Alexander the Great's conquests. And mathematics would continue to be an important part of Middle Eastern development, of Middle Eastern knowledge, even after the Islamic conquests, as we have many famous Islamic mathematicians, such as Al-Khwarizmi, who created algebra as we know it. And speaking about being advanced, let us go into something that has to do with being an advanced and civilizational state, which is number 2. The Middle East is the home of the earliest examples of codified law as we knew it. We have the early Sumerian and later Akkadian laws, which include various standardized punishments and rules for what is to be done or not to be done, We have later the law of Hammurabi, which is one of the most extensive law codes we have from the Bronze Age. We have later Israelite Judaic law, and then we have later Islamic Sharia, which are all examples of a very long tradition of creating standardized codified law, often based upon the concept of referring to a deity as being the creator of this law, or following the examples of chosen persons by these deities, as these laws have been justified by the divine as a method to grant them legitimacy, and through this legitimacy created a law that could in turn solidify and order early civilization and also later civilizations, avoiding constant clan and tribal warfare within these civilizations by solving issues through a system of divine justice. And this is something we ought to appreciate as a contribution to human civilization. And speaking about the divine and its place in creating and justifying laws and the traditions associated with this will be the thing that we will discuss in number 1. The Middle East has been the birthplace of the great religious traditions of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, which, depending upon view, could be considered to have been the result of arguably far older religious traditions in the Middle East, dating back even before Judaism, or have been their own creations. But whatever the case may be, or whatever view you have of this, there is no denial of the fact that they originated in the Middle East, and through the Middle East being a center of cultural exchange and wares and ideas, moving from the Middle East to the rest of the world and entering the Middle East from the rest of the world. These religions developed and spread like wildfire, creating the modern religious world as we know it, as these religions came to affect the history of the entire world through their influence, through their ideas, and through the developments that occurred in the Middle East during the creation of these religious traditions. I hope these 10 reasons of why Middle Eastern history is awesome and should be studied has convinced you to take a closer look into Middle Eastern history. This is the Culture Genie, and I hope to see your comments on this video and on my other videos about Middle Eastern history and culture.
Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities.
اشتركوا بالقناة من فضلكم.